Water pollution, chapter 14. When we talk about water, the pollution is automatically comes to our mouth because this is one of the major environmental problem. Water pollution refers to degradation of water quality as measured by biological, chemical or physical criteria. Especially when you think about a polluted water, you have a very unpleasant picture in your mind. Maybe water body mixed up with some tins or cans or some muddy and some algae and some waste. So this is not a beautiful picture that you having in your mind. So the water pollution is actually degradation of water quality as measured by biological, chemical or physical criteria. Pollutants. Any substance that in excess is known to be harmful to desirable living organisms is considered as the pollutant. The greatest water pollution problem in the world today is lack of disease-free drinking water for about 20% of the world population. So we are running out of our drinking water. This is the biggest issue. Waterborne diseases that kill about 2 million people a year, and most of the deaths are of children under the age of 5. Common pollutants. Now, what are these substances that we just talked about? Oxygen demanding waste or common organic waste, and also pathogenic waste. That means pathogenic microbes and nutrients, petroleum, especially the oil, toxic waste. Within brackets, you can see chemicals, heavy metals, radioactive waste. These are toxic waste. Sediment and thermal plumes. These categories are considered as the common pollutants. Oxygen demanding waste. What is that means? So oxygen demanding means some waste that really needs oxygen. So dead organic matter could decompose bacteria and oxygen demanding process. So when you think about this, when animal die, so that is organic matter. What is organic matter means? Building up with hydrogen and carbon, hydrocarbons. So dead organic matter decomposition by bacteria that needs oxygen to decompose this hydrogen and carbon material, and eventually they become carbon dioxide and water. That's the end product, but you need oxygen in this process. And BOD, biological oxygen demand, high BOD associated with a high level of decaying organic matter in water, reducing dissolved oxygen for other healthy organisms. Sources of oxygen demanding waste, natural processes, agricultural applications, urban sewage and runoff. So these are the sources of oxygen demanding waste. The pathogenic microbes. You may heard about E. coli bacteria or Escherichia coli is the right name for that particular bacteria. That's in the fecal matter. So the fecal coliform bacteria is a harmful risk diseases and health of E. coli, and billions exposed to waterborne diseases, especially in poor countries. And the E. coli bacteria is the reason for these diseases. So epidemic risk of waterborne diseases during natural disasters such as earthquake, tsunami or flooding. Nutrients. Two most important nutrients are nitrogen and phosphorus. Nitrogen N, phosphorus P. Major problems, the cultural eutrophication. This word is very new for you, but this is very important term that you should remember and understand what this means. So cultural eutrophication, that is algae booming, like exponential growth of algae that triggers the BOD problem, biological oxygen demand, and we'll talk about that how this is happening. Major sources for nutrients are fertilizers, feedlots, and discharge from wastewater treatment plants. Areas of certain land use is agriculture and urban areas where you're gonna do most of these agricultural practices or any other developments where you're going to produce these different nutrients and release them to the environment. Eutrophication, especially to deal with nitrogen and phosphorus. When people use their fertilizers and dump these extra fertilizers into a river or the pond or lake, whatever water body, so they're going to grow a large number of algae in this particular water body. So this is called exponential growth of algae or algal blooming, and that can cause the the top part of the water column is going to be covered with this algae, and the sunlight cannot penetrate through this water body and cannot reach towards the bottom of the water body. That is going to create anoxic conditions towards the bottom of the water body. That can cause problems for the aquatic life or the animals or fish or any other water related organisms to die because they don't have dissolved oxygen to do their metabolic processes. So they're running out of oxygen and the sunlight is covering, and then no photosynthesis, no oxygen. So biological oxygen demand increases because of the eutrophication. So eutrophication is again the exponential growth of algae because of the higher concentrations of nitrogen and phosphorus in the water. Oil. Major problems. The polluted water, ecosystem damage, interrupted socio-economic conditions of the community. The major sources of oil is oil spills from tankers and pipelines or offshore oil production wars. For example, the Gulf War 2006 war in Lebanon. So that kind of creating a lot of supply of this oil into this environment. Toxic waste. Synthetic organic chemicals, up to 100,000 chemicals in use, especially those POP, persistent organic pollutants. Heavy metals such as lead, mercury, zinc, cadmium, example lead contamination. So these are very highly impacted environmental issues, especially when you talk about these contaminations towards your drinking water that can cause a large social problem, at the same time huge health problems. Radioactive materials is another toxic waste, and that's going to cause a lot of different cancers and a lot of health issues. Selected persistent organic pollutants: aldrin, atrazine, DDT, daldrine, endrine, PCBs, dioxins. So these are the some of the persistent organic pollutants, and you can see the example of use. Most of them are insecticide and use in the agriculture, use in crops when you do farming. So these are something that we always do in practice in somewhere in the world, not in particularly in Mississippi, but even within Mississippi you have seen some farms and you're using these different types of pollutants. They become pollutant when it in excess amount and not manage them properly and releasing them to the environment without a proper care. So then that's become a huge environmental issue. Sediment pollution. Sand and smaller particles are considered as the sediment. The polluted streams, lakes, reservoirs, even ocean water, they can transmit these pollutants into these sediments. The soil erosion, dust storms, floods, and mud flows are the major sources where you can see these sediment contaminations. The greatest water pollutant by volume is the sediment pollution. Thermal pollution. The temperature increases and less dissolved oxygen. This is adverse changes to habitats of organisms. Economically, this is going to impact, especially if you think about fish industry. Hot water discharge from industrial operations, power plants, abnormal ocean currents could create this problem. Point sources of pollution. point sources are discrete, confined, and more readily identifiable point sources of pollutant. Common sources are landfills, discharge from wastewater treatment plants, discharge from industries, power plants, stormwater runoff, etc. So identify sources, on-site treatment and mitigation and prevention is important. So the point sources, since they are point sources, then you can identify where it is happening and what is the source. Then you can use different techniques in order to figure out where this pollutant is moving, and you can stop that if you know the path of the movement. Non-point sources of pollutions. These are influenced by such factors as land use, climate, hydrology, topography, native vegetation, and geology. So 9-point sources are diffuse, intermittent, and hard to specifically identify because you don't know the place where they're coming from. Causes of non-point pollutions often regional, cumulative, and compound, influenced by land use, climate, hydrology, topography, and geology. So, common sources are urban runoff, agricultural practices, mining like acid rain and acid drainage. Here's a picture that you can see how the sediment contamination and water contamination. Acid mine drainage. I think in your first introduction lecture or the slides, I think I mentioned about the acid mine drainage. Here again, you can talk about it because this is the place that we should talk about it since we are in the water pollution chapter. Acid mine drainage refers to acidic water with elevated concentrations of dissolved metals that drains from coal or metal mines. So mining is one of the major economical practice that we do today in United States and all over the world. And the acid waste or the acidic water is created through this process. Acid mine drainage is water with high concentration of sulfuric acid in particular. So it's a sulfur dioxide mixing with water and forming sulfuric acid. Acid mine drainage is produced by complex geochemical and microbial reactions. That means the microbes, they tend to make organometallic complexes with some of these metals and colonize and doing lot of things within this acid mine and creating a lot of environmental issues. The acid water is extremely toxic to plants and animals in aquatic ecosystems. The Tar Creek area in Oklahoma was at one time designated by the EPA as the nation's worst example of acid mine drainage. Here's the picture. Why care about groundwater pollution? That is very important. If you remember, when we talk about water resources, we talked about hydrologic cycle. In hydrologic cycle, we mentioned about surface runoff versus groundwater. So the groundwater, you're talking about the horizontal movement of water. At the same time, the groundwater is the source for our drinking well, and that's where we're gonna take out our water to drink. So why do we care about groundwater pollution? So most abundant fresh water sources are coming from groundwater. Growing dependency on groundwater because we are running out of the surface resources and we dig into the ground and looking for the water even within the ground. So about 50% of people in the United States depend on groundwater for drinking water. So this is a big reason that we should care about groundwater pollution. This triggers other environmental problems, the water pollution, subsidence, saltwater intrusion. So this is why we need to pay attention to the groundwater pollution. It is estimated that 75% of the 175,000 non-waste disposal sites in the country may be producing plumes or bodies of contaminated groundwater. Groundwater pollution has had impact depend on amount of contaminant discharge, chemical concentration or toxicity, degree and duration of exposure of people or other organisms to the pollution. Well, now we need to talk about National Water Quality Assessment Program. So we are worrying about the water quality, we talk about the pollution, and how come we can save our water and clean our water, and what are the rules and regulations, that kind of stuff. In the past 25 years, great improvements in manufacturing, processing, and wastewater treatment facilities. That's a great thing. The program integrates both surface water and groundwater systems that monitor and study aquatic ecosystems. The goals of the program are to carefully describe current water quality conditions for many of the freshwater streams and aquifers in the United States, and to monitor and describe water quality changes over time, and to increase understanding concerning the human and natural factors that affect the nation's water quality. And these are common sources of groundwater pollution and contamination. You can read it. Groundwater pollution versus surface water pollution. So residence time is different. If you think about surface water versus groundwater, the groundwater has a higher residence time. Environmental conditions like inflow, flow rate, dissolved oxygen. If you compare this with the surface water versus groundwater, the dissolved oxygen in groundwater is less compared to the surface water pollution, because the surface water is always attached with the atmosphere where you have oxygen involved. And harder to track pollution sources. When it comes to groundwater, you cannot really track the source of the pollutant. So you have to use the dye or stable isotopes or different kind of technique in order to understand where this is coming from. And more difficult and expensive to clean up, especially when it comes to groundwater. This is spread out everywhere, like every single pore space between soil particles. You can see the groundwater groundwater is spreading, and at the same time, if you're a pollutant, so it's not easy to clean up, and may pose long-term risk also, because you don't know what's underneath, and this may slowly and slowly this may get connect with the drinking water wells, and that can cause large environmental and the health issues. So water quality and stream ecosystems in United States. You can see the percentage of stream length, and the stream length right here, and the national and eastern highlands, plains of lowland and west. So you can see the water quality: good, fair, poor, not assessed, and no data. So looking at this chart, you can see the eastern highland, you can see 52% of poor, and the highest right here, the western region, you have the 45% of good water. Salt water intrusion. More than half of the world's population lives in or near the coastal zones. We talked about this when we talk about the coastal erosion. So groundwater pollution from saltwater intrusion is not a local, isolated problem. This is a global problem. This causes major water supply problem in New York, Florida, California when you talk about United States. But many other countries, a lot of people live near the coastal areas, they are having the same problem. So the Long Island case history you can read from the book. Saltwater intrusion mechanism. So the water table is inclined towards the ocean. Wedge of salt water is inclined toward the land. Overpumping of groundwater can cause the severe drawdown of groundwater, causes the saltwater ascension. So salt water start to get into the ground. So here is the picture that you can see. The water table is right here, and the cone of depression, we talked about this last time in the last slideshow. The cone of depression is created, so this the salt water is trying to get into the area, and this is the salt water and fresh water get interacted, and that's a contamination right there. Pre-treatment studies. So identify contaminants and their characteristic of transport behavior. It's important. Then you can do some treatment. Identify the characteristic of aquifer geology, especially the factors controlling groundwater flow, physical dimension and structure, and what type of soil, the porosity, permeability, all of these characteristics needs to be identified. And determine the hydrologic characteristic of polluted aquifers, flow direction, flow rate, discharge versus recharge conditions, and select possible treatment strategies and methods. So groundwater treatment. So extraction wells, vapor extraction, bioremediation, permeable treatment bed. So there are different methods of treating groundwater and weather zone water. So you can read about that slowly and understand this. Water quality standards, MCLs, that means maximum contaminant levels. Permissible limits for 83 contaminants. MCLGS means maximum contaminant level goals, the maximum level at which no adverse health effects from a lifelong exposure. SMCLs, non-enforceable limits for contaminants that affect aesthetic qualities in drinking water. So these are some abbreviations that you should understand when you talk about water quality standards. Here the maximum contaminant level. In this chart you can see the contaminant and the maximum contaminant level and the comment that whether it's highly toxic and affect to what system in your body, likewise, and what this gonna cause. For example, benzene is right here, 0.005 milligrams per liter is the maximum contaminant level. If not, it's gonna cause the cancer. Law. The laws are important. So used wastewater must be treated before they're releasing back to the environment. So that is the law. The break the potential vicious cycle of wastewater entering the general water cycle is a problem. So tire treatment and reuse systems. So septic system, rural residential areas, the water treatment plant for towns and urban cities, innovated ways to recycling and reclaiming wastewater, and new technologies for innovative wastewater treatment. And this is a diagram, idealized diagram for wastewater treatment plant. You can see the incoming raw sewage and going through this, all these cylinders, and eventually disinfection and then discharge or advanced treatment. So the discharge of treated water to surface water, or treatment, then discharge or reuse as the reclaimed water. So these are different possibilities. So the primary treatment goes to secondary treatment, then you can make the decision about whether you're going to discharge it or going to the next step, that's the advanced treatment. So reduce effects of water pollution. Develop and refine better ways to evaluate water pollution problems and their impact on aquatic life and the health of the people. Implement new and innovative cost-effective water treatment technologies and develop products and processes that minimize production of water pollutants and their release into the environment. And these are some critical thinking topics as an individual citizen in the country, and you can think about this water pollution, especially when it comes to groundwater pollution and this contamination of these pollutants within these water bodies, within your drinking water wells, all kind of things. And with that, we are going to conclude the chapter 14. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or post your question in the Blackboard.